Can everyone hear me? Is that working?
Cool. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, it's great to be here, and I really enjoyed, getting to know almost everybody here, all of the teachers, all the priests, and the faculty. A lot of the faculty has come up, and I recognize so many people. It's just great to be back here again. And today, I just wanted to give you an introduction to how I created this big mural and how it evolved over time. And I think it's such a complex piece that it has many stages. And it actually took me about 8 months to finish the piece. And that's going from sketch stage to finish installation. So there was a lot of work during that period. It was just a tremendous amount of organization, and working with my brother Phil, it was important to get all of the detail elements down. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about, this is the first slide. This is the theater that I saw the first time I came out to view the wall. I actually saw the plans early on, and I realized that there was a wonderful curve. And so I wanted to play with that curve. And one of the influential artists in my career has been Antonio Gaudí, who is a Spanish architect. And he always played with amorphous shapes and curves in his architecture. And so I was really happy that it was curved, actually, because to me, if it had been flat, it would have been an entirely different piece. It wouldn't have been as dramatic, and it wouldn't have had that element of drama that I could weave into the painting. So I changed my concept once I realized the size and the scale of this. And next slide. So you can see this is the beginning of the theater. The wall has an indentation, and that's the curve. The next slide. So this is just the beginning of the evolution. Next slide. So the first stage in terms of my installation was to build ribs, and working with this curve at the top was really important to me. So I wanted to keep that curve as part of the design. So I designed these ribs that will carry the panels all the way through. And it was sort of a difficult concept to begin with, because you're playing against two curves, and you've got the convex curve and then this other curve up above, which really was challenging to coordinate. Next slide. But it was doable, and I knew it would work. Next slide. And then the next slide. Okay, so here's how I started in my studio. My studio is not massive. It's not a massive space, so I could do 7 panels at a time. And fortunately, I did all the math, and it came out to 27 panels total for the mural. So I worked in sections. This was the beginning of the first section. Next slide. And you can see that I started working in a sepia tone, and I always do that with my paintings, because it's a way to kind of create your ideas and get them out on the canvas. In this case, it's panel, but it's a great way to get your ideas out in a quick manner and to start composing without getting into the color. Next slide. And it can evolve pretty fast. It just depends on the day. It can really move right along. So the evolution of all of my ideas were evolving as I worked in the sepia tone. And it's very fast. I use rags, and I use large brushes, and really try to work fairly quickly, because because my style is very quick, and I like the fact that it moves fast, it moves forward. Next slide. So you can see it's evolving, and it was really exciting to see this kind of massive thing coming together. Next slide. And so, even at this stage, you get a lot of detail to work with, so it's actually very helpful to me to get all this underpainting done. Next slide. And now here I've got the underpainting underway, and then I start to lay in my background tones. And this is helping to separate the continents. Part of the idea in my concept was the continents of the world and the way the Jesuits evolved from Spain, where Ignatius began with his spiritual quest and moving into all of the other continents around the world. So the concept of the painting itself is very abstract. It's very, these are not geographically correct continents at all. They're Mark Steele continents for sure. So it was important for me, though, to get the feeling of each continent in some way and to get sort of the essence of a piece of the continent. Like this is the reductions in Paraguay in South America, and above that is China. And a lot of the icons are relevant to the locations. On the left, of course, is Spain, and so the whole evolution of Ignatius leaping out of Spain and working his way into the world. The figure on this column is actually St. Francis Xavier, who worked along with Ignatius. And Ignatius I actually added to the top of the castle, and that's his birthplace. So that was a nice place to start, the evolution. Next slide. Next slide. So you can see, I'm sorry about these slides because they're not very crisp, but you can see the detail. That what I do is I kind of work with a combination. I work in a very large mass areas, and then I start to go into the detail. So I really try to lay in big areas and then work in the smaller detail next. Next slide. And of course, all the elements of the geography start to, sort of dictate the color and the palette. Next slide. And here you can see the evolution of the paint and the tonalities that I've decided to use. Some of the detail in the churches, and a lot of the architecture, which was really important to me because the architecture is one of the things that the Jesuits were, quite revolutionary with. I feel like, I was fortunate that they had really created so much in the world architecturally because it made the mural very interesting. Yes?
What kind of paint were you using?
This is acrylic. And the reason I used acrylic is, as opposed to oil, is because I wanted it to dry so that I could keep working on top of the layers. So it really helped to speed things along. And please ask any questions you have as we go along. Okay, next slide. So, and you've seen the mural, so you know what's going on here. But we can go through those slides a little quicker as we go. Next slide. And this is going on into the next section with the Jesu. And the Jesu, I realized in my composition originally that needed to be front and center. It really needed to be the most powerful element. And so the scale of the Jesu is massive, especially compared to the Vatican, which the Pope would be terrifically upset with, but you know, it was very important to be dramatic with that dome. This is just the evolution of the painting. So you can see I really move around a lot in the production. Yes?
So, why did you decide to use the three-dimensional pieces like the dome?
Well, you know, I work in both sculpture and painting, and one of the things I love is bringing 3 dimensions to a lot of my work. And after these slides, I've got a few things to show you that are more fine arts pieces. But I really think, especially in the case of the mural, it dramatized the whole view, which was sort of an aerial view in many ways. It's an aerial concept, so these other elements that are coming out make it, you know, even more dramatic and edgy. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Next. So this is obviously, you know, the Regis section, and India, and Africa on the left, and of course North America, Canada, and the Mexican area down below, California on the right. So you can see the landscape has been abstracted, but it serves the purpose of getting all of this iconography out there on the panels. Next slide. And this is the boat before I added the 3-dimensional elements. This is the boat that the Pope will eventually land on. Next slide. And now here it is in my studio. The great thing about these panels was that I could take them apart individually and move them around. So I moved them back and forth until I was finished, and then I created crates and was able to crate these out here. So this is just in my studio. And here's the piece being installed. And, now this is some of my other work, and you can go back maybe one panel down. These are about 7.5 feet tall, and these are some of the sculptural pieces that I do for my own fine arts. This one is titled Andalusia, and it's in southern Spain. And you know, I just wanted to experiment with the scale of doing a vessel that's this large. Yes?
Does the city actually carved into the base itself?
It is, yeah. The way I sculpt it, this is actually plaster that's formed over a metal and wood form that I create. And then, so some of the buildings are just formed in the plaster and then painted. So I create the shape first and all the forms, and then go into the painting. And the same thing in this one, although this one doesn't have the 3-dimensional elements much. This is called Barcelona, and then this one is the 7 Oceans. And this one is also, you know, you can see the remnants of the boat that's in the mural. And I was working on this one right before the mural, so I think that's why I brought the ship into the Regis piece. So you can see how big they are in my studio. I don't have much space to move around, but they are for sale. And this is a piece that I was commissioned to do for a television network down in Florida. And, so this is another example. It's all plaster, but these rocks and these pieces, these elements are created so that they look real, obviously. Yes?
So how many are they?
These are very light because you build them up over a very light metal form, like a wire mesh, and they're very light, but they're very sturdy. And over that metal form, I put either burlap or a thin cotton dipped in plaster, and they're great fun to paint. Okay, this is a paper piece. This is called Manhattan. This is a big boat too. It's about 6 feet wide. And this is also plaster, and these are really hand formed. So it's really using the plaster with tools and brushes and building up the form and then painting on top of that. Excellent. And another paper piece. A lot of my viewpoints are aerial perspectives. I've been experimenting with that for a while. And so a lot of these are my boats that are all in that perspective. And again, these are all, this is also acrylic on plaster. Now this is a large painting that is actually down in Puerto Rico, but it's an oil piece that I did a while ago. But it's a very large piece, about 9 feet. And this piece has sculptural elements that attach to the wall, and they stick out. This is the commission that I did for someone in Seattle. And this is another large oil painting. Lithograph. I do a lot of watercolors and do some lithography. So, and this is also sepia ink and watercolor. And this is an example of one of the commercial projects that I've worked on. And this is a restaurant, a Spanish restaurant in Boston, and it's a great place. So this was great fun to do. They're actually mosaic pieces on the top, and then these other forms are epoxy, so it's a mixed media. And then I just wanted to bring these in as well to show you. These are my 3-dimensional dioramas that are sculpted, and then they're photographed. So all of the elements are clay pieces that are sculpted. This is Beethoven with his orchestra, and this is Van Gogh with the Starry Night. This is Rubens. This is Jackson Pollock, whose fantasy studio. So I think, that's the last one. But I wanted to bring those in just to show you that a lot of the reason I work with so many of the dimensional elements in the mural is because that's a big part of my career and a big part of my direction in art. So I'd love to have you, send me any questions you have. Yes?
Where did you study specifically for?
Well, I did study at Boston University. I was in their fine arts program at Boston University. And then when I got out, I really got a studio very quickly and just started working on my own. And a lot of my work is illustration as well. So I illustrate for magazines, and I've done design work too for years. Yes?
Jackson Pollock, how big is the entire diorama?
That's a great question. It's about, the diorama, the figure itself is about a foot or a little bit less, and then the diorama itself before the photograph is probably 4 feet by 4 feet. And then, because you need to have it fairly large to get the whole atmosphere and to get the lighting in place. The lighting's really important in these pieces, so I really try to make them big enough so I can play with the light. The actual images are meant to be the 2-dimensional pieces, but I still have the sculptures in the studio. But yes, Sean?
In terms of the mural outside, what's a particular part that maybe emerged as you were painting that you just got really into or fascinated by?
That's a great question. I think probably Italy was, when I started working on the Jesu, and that whole area in the middle part of the painting was really inspiring to me, and that really got me going. And I think that was a real exciting area for me. And getting the dome to work, and that was the challenge. And that's why that middle part is so important to me.
And maybe a follow-up question, on the opposite end of the spectrum, what would have been a challenging part of the painting for you? That you just thought, I don't want to do this anymore.
Well, let's see. That's a tough one. I think, it was a little frustrating just getting the ideas out on the panels. And, once you get beyond that, then it's really exciting because you've got the composition and you've got all of the churches and you've got all the elements. I think the hardest part was making sure that I had all of the pieces in place, and keeping it fresh and fluid and not getting stuck. And basically I knew that I couldn't get myself stuck because otherwise I'd never finish by Phil's deadline. Yes?
When you were painting the panels in your studio, they were flat against the wall, and then you installed with this curve. Was there any surprise to you when you put that curve in that things didn't turn out in perspective the way you would hope?
Well, it was a total shock to me because I had just hoped that it was going to work. And I was pleased that it made them a little funky. It made some of the buildings a little bit, more dramatic. I think that it was what I was envisioning, but I wasn't sure it was going to work. So it was kind of a brave move that I wasn't sure. But I was very pleased that it did work. I had to work flat in the studio because of the space. And,
There were a few that's separated a little bit at the top between your hands.
when we installed it,
Yeah.
because of the curve, it tended to pull the panels out this way a little bit. So we had to do a little bit of manipulation as we installed it. So it was kind of it was all totally new to me. And but I was really happy that it was doable once we got that in. Yes, Bernie?
How about the tools you use to implement the three-dimensional parts? It looks like they're plastic or metal. I'm not sure what you're using, but did you do a lot of trial and error of what could get that out and be durable?
Well, and they're very durable. This is a vinyl. It's a white vinyl that is fabulous to paint with acrylic, and it's easy to cut. But it's really solid material. You can't rip it. It's not like paper, and it's light. So I wanted to make these out of vinyl so that I could, really not add that weight to the top of the piece as well, and be able to, get the fluidity of the paint that I wanted in those pieces. Then I used plexi rod to hold them. So the nice part of that is too that these are light enough that the plexi rod was doable. If I had to use metal rod, that would have shown, and you'll notice in the mural that you really don't see that plexi rod, unless you're looking for it. So, yes, Bridget.
Is there a follow-up now to the mural? What are you taking from?
Are you commissioning? Well, right now I'm working on some sculpted heads of Jesuits and famous Regis Jesuits that you'll be seeing in the next year. So that's exciting. And I really enjoyed working on the tiles as well. The tiles are also elements that were challenging, but really enjoyable to create. Yes?
I was wondering, because in the slide, it wasn't much on the frame. Did you construct the frame?
Oh yeah, no, I didn't even mention that, but I did construct the frame, and I wanted something that would play off the Baroque theme, because that really, to me, was like a high period for all this Jesuit fine art. And so I created small elements of frame, and there were over 60 pieces that I used, and they had to be separate so that they could make the curve. So you don't really see those because I've lodged them together tight enough that you don't really see it. You see it as a continual frame. But it was kind of challenging because I knew that they had to fit without the seams showing. And it was great fun to create that. It's all plaster. It's a wood plaster, wire, and then some small molded instruments that are added to the plaster, and then it's painted in gold. So it was, but it's, the entire piece has over 140 elements at least. So it's pretty intense as far as the number of things. And Bridget?
Did you create design, or was it strict in?
Well, he was strict with some of the details that needed to be, but he gave me so much freedom, and that's what was wonderful. We really figured out the important elements of the piece, and we're now working on an app that will talk about each area so that Father Bob can have a lot of information when he takes people around. Because I can't remember every single artist, and it's hard to go through and talk about which church is which and the whole story of the Jesuits, but the app is going to talk about the entire history of the Jesuits and then talk about each individual artist. So that's exciting.
It's going to be interesting too when we get the sculptor of St. John Francis Regis out in front. He also is very Baroque in his approach, with the flowing robe and stuff. So
Really?
it's going to, the two pieces are going to really be compatible with each other and play off of each other in a really interesting way.
I can't wait to see that big sculpted piece. I mean, it's going to be 15 feet tall. It's going to be amazing out there. So it'll be wonderful. This Father Bob?
When you do these apps, will you not only include the historical aspects, but the artistic aspect? Because you
Yes.
don't want to just, this is what it is. No, you want to say, this
If-
is, and the emotion and the feeling and
Yes. It'll be a dialogue, and some of the elements will even have video. So it's going to be a really thorough app.
yeah, it's
I
not
think
just
it's
the
gonna be
history,
great.
but the art that goes, that follows, and okay, good, thank you.
Thank you for coming. And
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
I hope to do this next year.